Hello, everyone. Welcome to May 1st, 2020. The Day Weather Podcast has got, lots to talk about today. First of all, we're going to see shower and thunderstorm activity in some areas. For you podcast listeners and watchers in Wyoming, Nebraska, Utah, Montana, looks like it's going to be wet this weekend into early next week. Northern Colorado as well. For southern Colorado, western areas of Colorado, doesn't look like as wet of a forecast, but some of you are going to be able to get some decent early May rain, which is good. We want it to rain in May. May, on average, is usually the wettest month of the year for the low elevations of this region. If we don't have a wet May, that leads to problems in the summer. So while the weather won't be as good this weekend as the last couple of days, which have been spectacular, it's about what we expect this time of year. Now, there is some risk of severe weather. We'll talk about that here in a minute. The biggest risk is going to be today. Now, very cold May weather stays just to our east for now, but I tell you, folks, we need to keep an eye on it, and I'm going to show you why. This is why we said at the beginning of the week that we need to keep an eye on the weather in May, because we don't necessarily get over a hurdle this early in the season when it comes to getting out of the risk of big changes to cold weather. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the first ever guest on the Day Weather Podcast is going to be Shane Smith to talk about early season gardening. A lot of you know Shane from this region, from the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. Shane's going to be joining us on their podcast, not only today, but we're going to be talking to Shane at other days in the coming weeks about early season gardening here in the Western High Plains and Rockies. First of all, let's take a look at the precipitation across the Plains and Rockies through May. This looks a lot like the map we showed you yesterday. Moisture coming in from the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon and Northern California, then streaking eastward. We don't necessarily have a big storm system or front. We just have more moist, unstable air coming in from the west. And you can see the preferred area of thunderstorms and showers will be over western Nebraska, central and southeastern Wyoming this weekend, starting today. Then this other area preferred showers and thunderstorms here in northwest Kansas and east central areas of Colorado. Notice as you get south of I-70, it's not nearly as wet in Colorado, and across Colorado's southwestern areas, south of I-70, that moisture is just not there. So we're not going to see nearly as much south of I-70 this weekend. We do need to watch out for the risk of severe weather here. This is from the Storm Prediction Center. This is the first time this spring season we've had an area that the Storm Prediction Center thinks we may have strong to severe thunderstorms today. This would be strong winds, some hail, some brief periods of heavy rain. I think strong winds and maybe some small hail and heavy rain is the concern that we have right here. But this is another sign of the changing seasons when we start talking about severe weather. So we'll keep an eye on that late this afternoon, this evening, and into early tonight. The jet stream pattern by this weekend shows a more west to east flow across the country. That's why temperatures are going to stay mild. This little guy right here is a wave in the upper levels that will cut across the Rockies and flatten this area of high pressure that we have here. And you can see that. This is by Monday. That system comes off the west coast and pushes through. So early next week, we're going to have a cooling trend. Not a big cooling trend, but Monday and Tuesday expected to be a little cooler. And the chances of showers and thunderstorms will extend probably into Monday and Tuesday because of this system. Now, I want to talk about the long-range forecast. We were hinting that we need to take a look at next weekend, Mother's Day weekend. That weekend is always sort of a goalpost for us weather-wise in this part of the country. I want to show you something that showed up on the charts today that may or may not happen, but I want to show it to you to highlight just kind of what we're looking at this time of year and why you can never rest on your laurels. This is the European model for Mother's Day Sunday, next Sunday. Look where the high pressure ridge is. For those of you who watch and listen to the Day Weather Podcast, a Gulf of Alaska or Western Canadian ridge near the coast always means the door to Canada gets opened. Yesterday, we showed you that big blue area over Hudson Bay. Well, what today's European model is showing, that the colder air is now west of Hudson Bay, closer to us. And notice the trajectory of air by next Sunday on the European model. Oh boy, here it comes. And this little guy up here is a spoke of very cold air that's expected to come down. Now, this is just one model. So don't freak out just yet that it's going to be snowing and very cold on Mother's Day Sunday. Because the Canadian model, look at this. The Canadian model has a big area of high pressure overhead for Mother's Day Sunday. So if you believe the Canadian model, Mother's Day Sunday is going to be sunny, probably 70s and 80s. The European model says Mother's Day Sunday is going to be in the 30s and it could be snowing. The European model and the Canadian model, when you see big changes like this between the two, your confidence is very low. But I want to put a bug in your ear that anytime you see a model solution like this, sometimes they go away only to come back again. The American model, the global forecast system model, well, it's more like the European model. So 2 out of the 3 models are showing the air trajectories into the Western United States out of Canada by Mother's Day Sunday, although the ridge on the American model is further east. So we want that ridge further east. That keeps the colder air further east. If the European model ends up being correct, this is what it looks like. The big purple monster comes back by next weekend, not only for the Western High Plains and Rockies, but a large swath of the United States. Again, this may not happen. In fact, I think the chances are 50-50 it will. So the odds are just as good that it won't happen. But this is something on Monday we're certainly going to talk about. Now I want to throw the podcast over to Shane Smith, author, consultant, director, designer, director emeritus of the Cheyenne, Wyoming Botanic Gardens. Cheyenne recently retired from the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens and now is living on Colorado's western slope. And we're going to talk about early season gardening. We talked earlier this week about when is it safe to plant things, when should you really start going, and Shane's got some great tips and great ideas.
Not all vegetables are the same, and some vegetables can go out a lot earlier than others, as well as flowers too. So there's a real easy way to kind of remember what can go out when it's cool and what can go out when it's warm. So in general, your leafy crops like lettuce, spinach, your root crops, carrots, radishes, peas, and plants in the broccoli cabbage family, that includes cauliflower, kohlrabi, kale, that kind of thing. These plants can all take light frost. They can actually even be set out right now over most of your listening area. So that's the good news. Now, if the soil's on the cold side, they're not going to just explode into growth, but you can get them out either as plants or as seed, and you should be doing okay. Now, the plants that you should not put out just yet, unless you're in some real warm parts of your listening area, are the fruiting crops. And that would be things like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplant, or things you grow for their seeds, things like corn, beans, and even the popular herb basil. None of these plants can take much in the way of cold. They will either freeze up or they'll just suffer and take a hit that they never recover from. So how do you know when it's time for those guys to go in the ground? Well, one scientific way is to get a soil thermometer. And they're cheap little tiny thermometers with a little needle on the end, and you stick it into the soil. And every good gardener should own a soil thermometer. They're, not pricey at all. And the soil should be at the very least in the upper 50s at a minimum, and even better, starting to hit 60 degrees. Then you're probably good to go, unless Don Day says there's another Arctic front coming in the next 5 or 10 days, which we have seen. And the Front Range is notorious like that, as we have mentioned. You also want to see the nighttime lows in the upper 40s and better yet into the 50s. So that's a more scientific way to tell when those plants out. There's a less scientific way that I use a lot, and it's called phenology. And it's spelled with a PH, phenology. And this is where you plant based on other natural phenomena in nature. It's kind of part folklore and part good observation, but it really can work. So it's kind of climate-triggered biological phenomena. So here's some examples. When daffodils are blooming, it's a good time to plant peas. When the apple blossoms fall, and that can include crab apples, it's time to plant corn. Or you can also plant corn when oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear. You can tell this is kind of old-timey, but it works. You should look at planting peppers and eggplant outside when the bearded iris are in bloom. When dandelions first bloom, and these are the dandelions out in the middle of your yard, not the dandelions next to your dryer bin or next to your brick wall. So when the dandelions are blooming, that's a good time to plant beets and carrots and even other root crops. And when elm leaves are the size of a penny, great time to plant beans. Tomatoes can be set out when lily of the valley is in full bloom. Lily of the valley is a little shade-loving ornamental plant. So if you don't have lily of the valley, that might be a good reason to find somebody who does and ask if they can split you off some or find some in a catalog. Also, you can plant tomatoes when the flowering dogwoods are in bloom. Potatoes are good to be planted when the dandelions also begin blooming. Peas when at apple blossom time, just when the apples are peeking out. Squash and beans, you plant those when the lilacs are blooming. And most perennials can go out when the maple leaves are just starting to emerge from the buds. Asparagus, rhubarb, strawberries, you plant those when plum trees are in bloom. And if you want a little more information on that, you can Google phenology, Phenology. Also on the Botanic Garden website, there is a very nice explanation of it as well. Just go to their garden tip section or Google Phenology China Botanic Gardens, and you'll probably find that handout there. So it's kind of a fascinating way to do it, but it's worked for people for years.